Here are the instructions for writing a formal lab for the milk carton lab. So the first thing that you want to do is open your notebook. The blank inside cover you're going to see, so your first page is going to be the table of contents. What you need to include in the table of contents is the title, the date, and the page number. So for instance, we did the milk carton lab, the date was the 27th, and we have it on page 1. So that's going to be part of your title points. Then please skip this page in case we have a table of contents that goes too long. I don't think we will, but it just helps with the cleanliness of the lab notebooks. On this next page, it's really important that we follow this direction. The only thing that goes on the left-hand side of your page is math. So right now I have our notebook paper here drawn. I've drawn a line down the middle so it looks like what your notebook should look like. The only thing that goes on the left-hand side there is your math. Your math equations and any work that you're going to show goes on the left. So then the next thing that you're going to fill in is the rest of your title. So you're going to title it the Milk Carton Lab. So for this example, I have Mrs. Hanson and Mrs. Hickey as our lab partners. So you're going to put your name and your lab partner. You're going to include the page number, and you're going to include the date. All of that is 5 points of what you're doing. This right here, people miss that a lot, so those are easy points to get. Don't miss that. The right-hand side, just a reminder, is the only place where writing goes. So the right-hand side is for writing. That should be easy to remember. The next thing that you're going to do is copy down the objectives. Please skip a line when you do this, and then copy the objectives from the milk carton lab that we did that was part of the lab technique lab. So this is pretty easy here, pretty easy points. You're just copying those down. You can use your own words to the best of your abilities, but sometimes it's not very easy to change the objectives into your own words. They're very straightforward. So copy the objectives down. This right here is also 5 points in your lab notebook. Then you move on to the background section. Notice I skipped another line right here, so in order for us to read these labs a little bit easier, please skip lines between the sections. So the background section, the first thing that you're going to do is summarize any information needed or given in the lab that's going to be helpful for you to understand what's going on. And if a reader were coming in and doing the lab, it would be helpful for them to understand what's going on. So any information that you need that's going to help you create this lab and do this lab well. So then I'm going to turn the page. If you don't have to turn the page yet, don't turn the page. But on my example, I ran out of room, so I'm going to turn the page. I'm going to continue my background section. The other thing that always goes in your background section is any math and chemical formulas that you're going to use in the lab. So in this case, in the lab, what we used were the dry volume, which was the length times the width times the height. The lab ratio, which was the dry volume, is equal to the wet volume. So you're going to actually end up dividing by the smallest number to get one of these values equal to 1. And the help on this math is actually set up a little bit more on our calculations page, so we'll get to that in just a minute. And then the last thing that you're going to include there is the percent error. You're going to do percent error on just about every lab that we do in this class, and that's just your lab minus your actual absolute value divided by your actual times by 100. And notice I also included the page number right up here. So there's your background. Once you're done with your background, you're going to move on. Again, if you don't need to turn the page yet, you don't have to. The next thing that we have is the procedures. So in the procedures, you've got materials, safety, and any steps that you're going to include. So what I recommend that you do right now is go ahead and pause the video and fill in your objectives, your background section, and your materials and safety. The other thing that you need to include in your procedure is material safety steps, as well as include a labeled diagram of your setup. So go ahead and pause the video right now and get those things filled in, and then go ahead and hit play again so that you can hear the rest of the explanation of how to set up your formal lab. So hopefully you hit pause and you've got everything filled in. So now we're going to work on our data table and results table. So I'm copying the data table straight from the lab sheet that we gave you in class. And the data table is anything that you measure. So anything that we're taking measurements of. So we took the measurement of the length, the width, and the height. Please make sure that you include units in your data table. It's really, really important. The results table is as follows. We've got our dry volume, our wet volume, our lab ratio, our true or theoretical ratio, and our percent error. And we'll help you with this math in class as well if you have troubles with it, but anything in the results table is something that you're going to calculate, and it's also important that you include units here as well. So now, here's where the left-hand side of the page comes in. So anything in the results table should be calculated. We're going to show our work for those calculations on the left-hand side. So here's where we're going to use the left-hand side. We're going to include the title of the equation, and then we're going to show our work for our equation. So we've got the title of our equations here. We've used the dry volume, the lab ratio, and the percent error. Then what I also want you to do is actually show your work and actually write in the equation again for me, and then it's easy, just put your work right underneath. So show your work by putting the values right underneath the equation. So we've got our dry volume, we've got our lab ratio there, and then we've got our percent error. And in this lab, I give you a little bit of help in terms of what our lab value is versus our actual value. In most labs, what we're going to be able to do is look at a given value as our actual value, and the lab value is obviously what we calculate in the lab. So what I would do is go ahead and pause the video here, get your data and results table copied down, get everything, all of your numbers copied in, go ahead and show your math on the left-hand side, and then you can move on. So hopefully you completed your data and results table. Now we're going to move on to our post-lab question. There are two options when you do post-lab questions. The first option is you can rewrite the question and then answer the question below. At that point, you do not need to use complete sentences. Or the second option is you can answer the question with a complete sentence. So now what I recommend that you do is pause your video and answer those 3 post-lab questions that you have for the milk carton lab. The next thing that you want to put down is your sources of error. So what I recommend that you do is copy the grid from your lab handout and try to the best of your abilities to fill out the sources of error. We'll work on these in class a little bit more, but go ahead and give it a shot and see how you do in terms of identifying what a source of error is in the lab versus what a human error is in the lab. And then last but not least, we have our conclusion, and this is the biggest reason why I want you guys to work on filling this lab in at home first, is that we're going to work on this conclusion together in class. Conclusions are the most difficult part of all labs that we're going to do in chemistry class, and so we want to make sure that you get a good basis for what our expectations are. So what I would like for you to come to class prepared with are the following. Please have your table of contents and your title filled out. Please have the objectives filled out. Please have the background section information summarized, as well as the equations included. Please have the procedures with the materials, safety, and steps included, and also include there, please, the diagram. Have your data and results table with the values included. Have your completed calculations page finished, and your completed post-lab questions attempted, and then also try to make an attempt at those sources of error. So I realize that that's a lot of things that you need to do in order to be prepared to come to class, but we really want to help you with your conclusions, and so it's very, very important that you do these things before you come to class. So in class, what our goal is just to review individually how you've set up your lab. So I'm going to go around and work with everybody and make sure your lab setup is good. We're going to work on sources of error together as a class, and then we're going to work on writing the conclusion. We'll identify excellent pieces of conclusions and look at a good example. This lab, the formal lab itself, is due Tuesday, and you will turn it in for a grade. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming to class prepared.